As the father confers identity to his child, it is absolutely important that he would lay the foundation of this by teaching the child on what his primary or her primary identity is. There is a difference between primary identity and secondary identity. So now we are going to address primary identity. I want to address this by telling you a story of how God taught me this. About 8 years ago, my wife came with one of the orphans that she served to the house and asked me whether we would like to adopt this orphan. I met her, she took her away again, and I had the time to consider whether we should adopt her. It took me about 2 weeks to come to the decision that it is fine if we take in this orphan. She was then 15 years old, her name Abungile Kwaza, and we decided to take her into our house. Now, coming into the house, from having been an orphan her whole life, her father moved out when she was 2 years old. She never knew her biological father. And then she moved from mother to grandmother, and then from grandmother to aunt, and aunt to aunt, and all of them died. And she ended up in a shack, living with 6 other people. And as they grew up, the situation was just not tolerable. So Amungile Kwaza moved into our house, obviously not knowing how to be a child. Not knowing what to do with this man, now possibly my father in future. She would observe the other children, and then when they would come to me at night and hug me or kiss me and say good night, Abungile would just stand at a distance and just wave good night and then disappear to her room. That went on for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then one night I was standing there at the end of the passage, and I noticed that someone was beside me while I was focusing on something specific. And when I turned to look who it was, there Abungile Kwaza was standing with her big eyes looking up into my eyes. She opened her arms and she said, "Good night, Daddy." I was forced to make one of the most important decisions of my life in split seconds. Obviously, I'm going to embrace her. But what am I going to say to her? Am I going to say to her, "Good night, Amungile"? Or am I going to say to her, "Good night, my daughter"? Because that sentence would seal a covenant with her forever. One of the most important decisions I ever made. In this embrace, as I hugged and held her very close, here by her ear, I said the weighty words, "Good night, my daughter." She went to her bed, and I went to mine, but my, oh my, I cried the whole night. The whole night, because I was thinking this was the very first time in 15 years that she ever had the privilege to call anyone father. I felt privileged to be able to be her father. But the other thing I cried about that night was that God said to me, "You just don't understand what it means to be my child. And your orphan daughter, adopted daughter now, will teach you what it means to be a child of the living God." Whenever Abungile would come into the house or into her room, she would be totally astonished with this favor that she found in life. But I, growing up with God, I have forgotten it up to that moment. And God had to teach me a new thing, how to really appreciate God with absolute awe and astonishment every morning that I wake up and notice that I'm alive. So now Amungile Kwaza has taught me, I am the child of a living God. I celebrate this every day of my life. I'm totally astonished that God did this massive risk to call me child of the living God. Because that is what the Bible says. The primary identity of me and my children is not what we achieve, is not even what we choose to be. The primary identity is a given identity bestowed on us by God, where He said, "You are my son. I've called you for a high purpose forever." If you lay that foundation for your child, then you can feel secure that whatever they build on that foundation is on firm, solid ground. The primary identity of your child is child of the living God. A massive status. A massive honor a massive, massive calling. This is what fathers should confer to their children.